We're just going to give it a couple of minutes for everyone who has booked a ticket to log into the Zoom, and then we'll get going. So, I think everyone is out of the waiting room. It's all a little bit strange, Zoom Q&A, but here we go. Welcome. I'm Selma from Rich Mix. Thank you for joining us for Rich Mix's very first online Q&A. It's a new way of working for us, and we are always ready to adapt and flex new muscles at Rich Mix, especially since our building has been closed. You can see it behind me. That's our cinema. And date for your diaries, our cinema reopens on the 4th of September as a socially distanced cinema. So please, yes, put that in your diary. Really delighted that for our first ever virtual screening, we've got White Riot. The themes are particularly pertinent for Rich Mix's history, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about a little bit later on. But it's as important for our history as it is for our present as well. I hope you've all managed to rent the film. It is still available via our website, so do share around. I just want to say a couple of quick thank yous. So thank you to Modern Films for allowing us to have the preview access of the film, to Love Music, Hate Racism for partnering with us on this Q&A. Hi, Ira from Love Music, Hate Racism. This is also part of Film Feels Connected. That's a UK-wide cinema season supported by National Lottery and BFI. And I'm sure we're all used to it now, but I will run through a couple of Zoom housekeeping bits. So if you could keep yourself on mute with your video turned off during the panel discussion, and then we'll proverbially open the floor for questions. And I'm that person that in real life would be running around with a mic, but I'll be doing that on Zoom, collecting your questions via either the chat function, so you can chat me with your questions, or you can raise your virtual hand, and you can do that via participants at the bottom of the screen. And I'd just like to remind everyone that this is being recorded. So now on to the interesting part, the panel. So on the panel, we have Rose Delcourt-Min, Education and Equalities Official at the Musicians Union. We have Ed Gibbs, co-writer and producer of White Riot. We have Becca Hudson, researcher and campaign organizer, including for Grime for Corbyn. Rubika Shah, director and co-writer of White Riot. And Ira Sylvester, national organizer of Love Music, Hate Racism. And our chair for the evening is John Pandit, founding member of Rich Mix and member of the incredible Asian Dub Foundation. So with that, I'll hand over to you, John. Thank you.
Hey, welcome everyone. Lovely on this hot and sweaty, whatever night it is, Thursday night, is it? And here we are. It's the most bizarre thing. I've never done this before. You know, I've sat on panels and everything and had an audience and actually can see people. And I think that focuses you. So if I sort of drift off somewhere, carry on the conversation without me, you know, if you hear like, hey Dad, what are we having for dinner? That's nothing I can do about that. That's going to happen, you know. So, you know, or if there's a knock on the door or something. So, I watched the film. I was blown away and it took me back. I'm that generation who just started to get politically active at the start of the 80s. You know, it was coming in. It was the downturn, as it were, politically. But things that got me into stuff, anti-racist work, anti-fascist work, I think it was that moment of understanding, and this was like, perhaps it wasn't a Rock Against Racism gig, but it was an anti-Nazi League gig, certainly. And we just moved down from the Midlands down to outside Harlow, and at Harlow Tech there was a Rock Against Racism gig till the stop.
The suspense is killing me.
Special patrol group, and it was a time when, sort of like, as young as a teenager, waking up and seeing things, and went to see Misty and Roots, and it was small hall at Harlow Technical College, and you know, the gig was going. It was mainly white audience, and we went to the front because it was Misty, and Misty, like, more punk than punk. When they started, it was just like, wow, it just kicked off. And then it came into the second or third number, and you could hear at the back, Zeke Eiling was going on. They started Zeke Eiling gradually in intensity. Zeke Eil. And the band stopped. And Puck, the lead singer, you could see he's weighing up what's happening. And the band, you could see others grabbing mic stands, ready to roll. Okay, let's see what happens. This is in Harlow, this is Newtown, out in the sticks. Well, he didn't say anything. He just looked at the crowd. And the Zeke Eiling just dropped in intensity and petered out. And they just went into the next number. You know, and it was sort of, at that moment, for a couple of minutes or so, it was like, we're here, we control the stage, and the room's with us. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And then what happened was that they went into the next number. See them I come, but we now run. And when they did that, for me, as a little skinny, mixed race teenager, isolated, whatever, I suddenly realised that the locus of, like, what I thought about racism, me standing up to racist bullies or whatever, wasn't about me and my bravery or whatever. It was about a collective endeavour that people were doing and involved in. And that was like best political education I ever had for £1.25, I think it was. Brilliant. And so that was the only thing. And I saw then that what you could do with music. And so when I come see the film, then my education, my involvement in grassroots anti-racist, anti-fascist campaigns, it was mythologized, Rock Against Racism. You know, it was something that happened. It was in those days. And we were in the middle, the downturn. Whatever the front and whatever people were saying, like Webster, Thatcher had incorporated it. And it become what we see now today, sort of part and parcel of the mainstream. And so we've had stuff since then and many campaigns, and I think people involved, everyone here has probably been involved with them over the years. But I watched the film and I was a bit reticent to watch it at first because I thought, is it going to be like something like the history doc? You know, where it's hermetically sealed in that time of the 1970s, and how do you talk to, you know, and what does it relate today? But I watched it, I was just blown away. It just brought it back, and it brings back, and it brings today what needs to be said, that somehow we've got to teach generations, not just the but generations that have come up since, activists and people have been coming into activism, those stories, those initiatives, and how then, in a way, we can do it together. So, Rubika and Ed, I mean, was that in your mind when you started this film, when you got this film, this idea together? Did you want to do a sort of historical thing, or was it very much about today? Was that the first, one eye on today all the way through?
I think from my point of view, I always wanted to kind of tell the story in a contemporary way. So it was very much about the things that attracted me to the story, you know, aside from, you know, the anti-racism and the music and, you know, all the politics of the era, was this idea that a very small group of people got together, you know, artists in a print shop. And at that moment, they didn't know that what they were going to do was going to be so big that they were going to put the Rock Against Racism Carnival on. And this idea that, you know, you could get together with your neighbour, or you could get together with a small group of friends and you can make an impact and you can make real change, was the thing I think that really was the spark for me, certainly, for wanting to tell the story.
Yeah, I think it was. I love your story, by the way, John. Fantastic story. And I should say, we did interview Poco. We interviewed so many people for this film, and unfortunately, more for budget reasons than anything else, we just couldn't fit it all in. And it would have been 5 hours long if we'd included everything that we shot. You know.
Well, can I just say, I think there should be a part 2. Come on, you've got to reprise this. You know.
Well, let's discuss that after this Q&A. But I always felt that we needed to capture the essence of the movement, and we needed to leave audiences with a feeling of feeling inspired and empowered to be able to walk out of that cinema and feel energized, and to be able to do something there and then if they wanted to. I mean, just go and create action. So that was the feeling that we wanted to convey.
And there's the graphics and the way that you've done it, sort of, because that was the other side, is how you make it up to date. You know, how you make it, but also it's about how people absorb film now. And if it's just talking heads or whatever, or all archive footage. In fact, the archive footage didn't look archive. I mean, I don't know how you managed to do that, but apart from looking at old cars on marches, you wouldn't have a sense. Some of it was beautifully done. It wasn't all grainy, whatever film. But I'm amazed, where did you get all that material from? How did you manage to research all that?
Well, I have to say, firstly, a big up to our colorist, Claire. She's fantastic. She worked actually after hours, really restoring a lot of that footage. She really put a lot of hours into it. We were working on there was archive in there that had scratches all over it, that had been in people's, back, because they're not in back gardens, but in sheds and, lofts and that kind of thing. And then we were given a whole bunch of archive. And as we would use a lot of it to cut with. And as we cut with it, we realised that we have to go and find the high res, because it just wasn't good enough. And we knew that the film that we wanted to make, we wanted it to have the production value, of a cinema narrative film, because we approached it like a narrative, actually. So we approached it with the stories of, a few of the people that were involved in Rock Against Racism. So it was very difficult, actually, because like Ed said, we interviewed so many people, and there were so many great stories. And like you said, there could be a part 2, a part 3, so many spin-offs as well. But we decided the characters, or the people that we wanted to focus on, and they really led the way, I think, in terms of how we wanted to tell the story. But it's funny, actually, because someone said to me the other day, "Oh, you're really inspired by GIFs and the animation." But when we were making it, we were just thinking about how do we make it feel punk, and make it feel, take some of the harder issues, I guess, some of the quite tough racial messages, and we incorporate them into graphics. So I guess make them accessible. You probably have to walk away, or maybe a couple of days after, you think about some of the things that you've seen, and it's it was a horrific time. It was hard, and the racism was really in front of you, I think, if you were a person of color.
I think also, just one other thing about the fanzine, actually, Temporary Hoarding, was that there was this wealth of graphics and stories, and covering issues that the mainstream media just weren't discussing at all, just weren't covering. So it was giving a voice to all these communities that had no voice, and so that had to feature prominently, and we felt that ought to act as the spine, didn't we, in the film? And then we thought, well, how do we bring that to life for a contemporary audience? Because as you said, just presenting talking heads or things flat on a screen, it's not very dynamic. And so we worked on that a lot, actually. The graphics, it was a labour of love.
You wouldn't believe, like a 10-second clip takes about 2 or 3 days to make. It's just mad. It's like, once you've done so much of it, you can't really go back and think, right, I'm not going to do any more of this. And I can't take credit for the animation. We worked with a brilliant animator, Lavan, so and he put a lot of hours into it to create that punk aesthetic.
Because I was at a march about policing, and it was the anniversary of Mark Duggan's murder by the police, in as far as I'm concerned, up in Tottenham on last Saturday. And it suddenly struck me that some of the older activists speaking, and then you had youngsters, teenagers from Forefront Project and whatever. And when we talk, we're talking like about things that happened at the end of the 70s, start of the 80s. You suddenly realise that when we were that age, it'd be like the activists getting up and talking about the war, the Second World War, in terms of history. So suddenly it occurs to me, part of a legacy, it's a history that they're part of and they can be part of. And so to involve people, you've got to use a kind of a methodology that's reaches out to people. And similarly, the choice of your artists that you use, polystyrene, but particularly Asian culture, what they call
Alien culture.
Alien culture. I mean, they were a myth. You know, I'd heard about them so much, but I'd never really seen proper footage of them. But I think I saw an interview maybe 10 years back in the press or something. But there they are on screen. It's like, oh, that's it. They were the people. They were the, you know what I mean? And it was wonderful to have that, you know. It showed that it was everyone getting involved. It was truly a united thing. And so look, I want to move on a bit and talk about perhaps some of the campaigns today and some of the issues that are going on. Becca, you know, you've been involved with some grassroots projects in recent times and operating in a completely different way than they did what Temporary Hoardings were doing, Rock Against Racism. How do you get organised? How, for example, you know, because the mainstream press and whatever were completely befuddled by, say, Grime for Corbyn. How did that come about, and how did you consolidate that and do gigs and everything?
Well, I think it reminded me so much in terms of the practical considerations when I was watching the film. And there's a bit where Red says, well, we wrote the ad up, this kind of letter defying Eric Clapton's fascism, put it in the paper and said, if you want to get involved, you can write to us. And he said something like, in about 2-3 weeks, they published it. And I was thinking 2-3 weeks, like in our work, like in the campaigning that I've been involved with, and, you know, lots of different grassroots organizations, it's like you send out a press release 7 a.m, and if it's not been picked up by 10-11 a.m, that's it, it's over. That's your day of action or your press release. You have to find another way of getting it out there. And that struck me as well in terms of people then writing to them and them getting organized and getting things together. Just how, I mean, in a lot of ways, the stuff that I've been involved in, or people of my age, or, you know, that kind of age bracket, have been incredibly privileged to have technology which allows us to communicate so fast. And so much of many campaigns that I've been involved with, my Grime for Corbyn included, but also campaigns like F Boris, I don't know if I'm allowed to fully swear on this Zoom, where it was organised in, you know, there was one kind of phone call between a few friends, and then there was setting up of an email address. An idea was put out there, was sent to the press, or was put on social media, and it just, in a really similar way, actually, the process felt very familiar in terms of it snowballs, and you get lots of people writing in from across the country, and you say, yes, please set up your autonomous groups, you know, we'll try and support you as much as possible. It snowballs, and it's just, in a cliched way, I guess, people power in that sense. But the kind of pace and timeline that they were working with really frightened me, because a lot of the stuff that I've been involved in has taken, I mean, Grime for Corbyn, I think, was 3.5 weeks from conception to final gig happening. And in between that, we had 3 or 4 smaller gigs in different cities across the country. And F Boris, similarly, we did a number of sort of street mobilisations when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, but during the snap general election period, again, we then put on upwards of 40 events across the UK. And that was completely autonomous. That was, you know, a crowdfunder, people getting in touch and saying, I'm from Newcastle, I'd like to put on an event for me and my friends. and we just have your half-hour phone conversations, and they would run off and do it, and they were resourceful and they got things together. So I felt a lot of parallels in terms of people can just do stuff. Actually, when they have commitment, they have little scraps of time here and there. They can beg, borrow and steal resources from other people, and incredible huge things can happen.
The thing is, it's like Rock Against Racism, as I mentioned at the start, it's like it's sort of like petered out kind of thing when the kind of turn of Thatcherism came in and there was a downturn in activism and whatever. And say things like now, you know, times change, and how do you maintain that kind of like movement, and how does it grow and adapt and change to the conditions it finds itself? So, I mean, I don't see there's like a, I don't know, drill for Sistama campaign coming up or anything. No. So how do you move it along? How do you take the next stage? How do you reach out to people, but how do you hold it and keep these campaigns moving along? Well, or do they just shift and respond organically to whatever conditions they find themselves?
I mean, just very briefly, because I know I want to speak, but I think it's a mixture of both in terms of there are people, in huge numbers of people, who are committed to spending a little portion of their time, day in, day out, week in, week out, on some kind of political work, whether that's mutual aid within their community, or being part of a campaigning organisation, or writing letters through an institution. There are lots of people who are willing to give up time to do this. But also times change, and they sort of have their own pace and their own kind of cultural moments. And I mean, I don't think that we will be seeing anything for Starmer, any kind of black music for Starmer, because he's made most of his career as a kind of career prosecutor. But what we have seen instead is a mass mobilisation of young people, really incredibly diverse, not just in terms of the young people that are going, but across the whole of the UK, for the Black Lives Matter movement in recent weeks. And that, as far as I know, portions of it at least, were organised in a really similar way. A few people who kind of knew each other wanted to get together and put something on. And they're some of the largest anti-racist mobilisations this country's ever seen.
Oh, excellent. Where's Ira? I can't see him on my screen. Is he there or is he gone? Oh. Ira, come on, from Love Music, Hate Racism. You've been putting on, Love Music been putting on gigs now for, I think I've done one or two, 10 years ago now, when I think the EDL came to town. We had a gig at Rich Mix, Jerry Dammers, and it was just like almost to like build up support for the anti-EDL march. Tell me about Love Music, Hate Racism. Do you see yourselves? Do you see yourselves as the heirs to Rock Against Racism? Okay, maybe not. Maybe he's frozen here on the screen. So, Road at the Musicians Union. Do you see yourselves? Playing a role in supporting initiatives like this that can be somewhat just spontaneous and may have a limited time?
Yeah. And
how can you do that?
Well, that's a great question. I would love the work we do with Equalities at the MU to be able to respond. I mean, like, as Becca was saying, these things can happen really fast. But yeah, I think we've got like 33,000 members and an Equalities committee, and we've got some amazing activists on that Equalities committee who are really engaged, and we do have a reach to help kind of spread awareness. But also something I was thinking watching White Riot was what a great, you were saying with the archive thing, what a great documentary to watch that would help like enrich musicians' existing knowledge of music and activism who might not have engaged with that before. And especially so, like when I was like a small angry mixed race girl growing up in Newcastle that didn't really have a community, and you know, finding out information about anti-racism activism, especially work that coincided with my interest in art and music, you know, it felt really hard won to find that information. But like having this like beautiful film available is fantastic. And I think it would be great for the MU to be able to engage and push forward all these movements. Like there's so much good activism that's come out recently, and some of the work that we were trying to do before this summer, that was perhaps people weren't necessarily engaging with it, but was, for whatever reason, their kind of interest and engagement levels have really gone up with all of the publicity and all of the work that activists coming at it from so many different angles. So that's made such a difference, even for the work that the projects that we're trying to do, such as like diversity, representation of musicians in orchestras, and diversity in the syllabus is the syllabi for examining boards, things that really help like kids who don't see themselves necessarily in music, who might not have known about Rock Against Racism.
Sorry, go on.
No, I'm going up, like you were saying before, like I'm going off onto a tangent now.
Not at all. No, I think that sometimes, the best music, punk, for example, came out of a confrontation, what happening, the IMF, everything that's shown in the film, suddenly we were at a crisis point. Well, now we're just on the abyss.
Mm.
We know there's an economic crisis just coming around the corner, and whatever racism, in the film, there's one, I must say that the kind of like, you've got Tyndall up there, you've got Webster, and before that, Mosley, and these were almost like panto, bad guys, these are the panto villains. But now, and so you hear them speak, and it's almost like Lord Hoare, they're the charming English eccentrics. But now, you see things, and it's so insidious, it's so nasty. You don't even need the Farages and whatever. This week has been competitive news feeds as they run their boats past poor people who are trying to escape from wherever, as they're bailing out their dinghies across the channel. And it's like a Saturday night game show kind of thing. And it's shown without comment, but what they're thinking is put across quite strongly. And so this symbiotic relationship between the right and the far right is something that's so hard to pick apart. And this is where those new forms of protest and things will come in. And I was saying about the musicians union, that simple thing in the film, where'd you get a PA from? Where'd you get a hall? Can we book a hall? They're the kind of practical things that I think will be so good. Just the people with the knowledge in that world. But in general, music inspires people, and politics inspires people into music, and it's vice versa. The two are so interlinked, you can't really separate. And this is where these movements will coalesce around and become the soundtrack of the struggle, as it were, just like 70s funk and soul with the civil rights movement in America. I see that time's running and passing quickly, but sorry, I lost you earlier.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of heard you ask part of the question, then my whole...
It's more like Love Music Hate Racism, because I can remember at Rich Mix we had a gig for Love Music Hate Racism. I think I DJ'd, Jerry Dammers DJ'd, and really it was a great event, and lots of artists. I think Loki was there. Maybe.
Yeah, there's a very good chance that Loki was there.
Yeah,
and a lot of our events. The guy's an amazing.
Logic on me, and really, it was two things. It was a night of entertainment, and I think we did one. I think it was supposed to celebrating Gil Scott-Heron at the time. I think there was a Bastille Hill, and but it was two things. It was one, just to have the gig, but it was also to have the gig, but also the EDL were coming into Tower Hamlets the following day, and there was a big thing, and there was various groups who were doing it. There was yourselves, there was people, the Labour Party, whatever, and they were having a thing. And there was also activists who came down who were more into direct action, and I think 150 of them were nicked. But through a combination of all these events, all these different movements coming together, the EDL only managed to get up to Aldgate, and they didn't march down Whitechapel High Street, which was a take as a victory. At the moment, all these groups are sort of like, obviously, they have their things for Tommy Robinson, who's now a refugee or not or whatever, in central London. But when they come into our communities, this is when we've got to make a stand. We've got to stop these marches.
Well, certainly.
And so the role of Love Music, I mean, how do you see it? How do you see it progressing? How do you see, as Beck said, how does it link into Black Lives Matter, grassroots campaigns? You know, how do we link these together and provide these big, a national profile, but also very local profile that encourages the communities to come out and attend?
Well, I feel like they kind of both happen almost simultaneously. So what you were saying before about how you can link politics and music together, a lot of times, like when we put on these kind of events, we use musicians and their kind of platform as like role models for kind of like anti-racist messages. And to put it really, really simply, how they kind of merge together is you put on the musical event, and the musical event attracts one, because you're saying you've got like a message, and you've got like the activists, you've got the musicians come down, and then you'll have the activists come down because you already know them, you can buy like through like kind of your network. You also have people who are just interested in the music, and it's kind of like got ya. Yeah. So it's like it's once they're like, once you're like all listening to music and and then it's that moment where you take the time in between songs to talk about real issues. So an opportunity for people to actually blend and meet each other. Like a large part of these movements are god damn it, my internet's unstable again. A large part of these movements are grassroots movements. We get a lot of messages saying, on these kind of events, how do we do this kind of thing, etc., etc., etc. It's just like, yeah, man, just do it. Like, go down, like, find local artists in your area. If you want some informational packs and educational packs, we try to provide those. But yeah, just like sometimes, like one of us will actually go out and actually say a few words if it's not too far. But a lot of the time, it's just like, it's encouraging people to stand up for what they believe in. It's like standing up for what they feel is right. And it's, it's just like, that's where it kind of comes. And then also when people come down, you say like, oh, look, this is a fun night. We're having a great time. These are our messages. But there's also this protest on Saturday. If you're interested in these kind of issues, you can also go down to that. And then you can kind of like mix it up. And then also at the protest, you'll have to be like, oh, we've got another gig on. And you can kind of like get people back to it. And it's like, you kind of mix the two crowds together, because then the people who are already at the protest, bring them down to the gig. People who are at the gigs, bring them down to the protest. It's just kind of a bit forward like that. And one thing I want to say is that, like, earlier on you mentioned quick going over time, etc., etc. But one thing I have noticed is that you said, how do you keep the momentum up during like, once you have these big events, and then how do you keep the momentum up? And I must say, it is hard to keep up the momentum when, like, you'll have something like George Floyd, and then suddenly everyone's interested. I mean, BLM, like, as a movement, started back in 2015, and then it went kind of like quiet for a while, and then recently it's just boomed up again. And like, you do get these kind of lulls and then highs, and it's the phrase I heard to describe it before is, you'll have decades where nothing happens, and then weeks where decades happen. And it's just like, there tend to be just these kind of like, not catatonic, catalyst moments where you'll tend to get like a lot more movement and a lot more reinvigoration into like kind of the cause / the fight, which can be difficult, but it's also kind of, I mean, it is what it is, but you got to just keep going and going and going and going and going. And you do get smaller things as well in the meantime. And it's still enjoyable and it's fulfilling. Also, it gives you the moral high ground in like most of the situations that you're in, which is just fantastic.
Guy, before I think soon we should be going into taking questions from the audience, from the floor, as it were. But does anybody on the panel want to make some other remarks, things that they want to say either about the film or just generally about what they do? Oh, come on, don't be all shy. Look, we're at home.
I mean, I just think in response to what Ira was saying about those highs and lows, you know, the kind of ups and downs of mobilisation, is that I think, I mean, there's lots of things going on in the US which make this resurgence of Black Lives Matter particularly huge and militant and spread across the whole of the country pretty much, even in like really small, very white towns. But there were people in the background for those 4 years who were doing trainings and building organizational infrastructures and building relationships and fundraising for things going on in their communities and making connections with people in and outside of prison and in and outside of different areas in their community. And those networks, as much as they're kind of quiet and ongoing in the background, you see in a moment of real sort of political ignition how much of that work has actually been going on across the whole of the US. So I think that's always really important to remember, is when these kind of flare-ups happen, there's all of these people kind of beavering away for a long time. And it has a huge impact in terms of how it can just change political landscape.
Absolutely. I really like to remember on a personal but also in work capacity that activism has so many different ways of manifesting itself, and so many of those are like not necessarily headline grabbing, exciting, dramatic things. They can be like engaging with your community on a really personal level, or kind of laying all the groundwork and things like you were saying, like training, knowledge sharing, skill sharing, giving people tools. Okay.
And Rubika and Ed, so you put out the film, and then of course it's COVID and lockdown, and so you haven't had screenings, or have you had physical screenings, as it were?
Well, not in the UK. I mean, we had a couple of we had the London premiere last October actually, and interestingly, when Extinction Rebellion was occupying Trafalgar Square, and literally the night we were screening, which was brilliant, because it was when people asked us, "Oh, where's the protest movement today?" I went, it's round the corner. It's literally happening right now. I've forgotten what the question was. Sorry.
It's almost like where next for the film. What do you want to do with it next?
Yes.
What's next with the film, in a way?
Well, we're gonna hopefully have a September cinema press release of some kind. We did screen at Berlin. Sorry, that's what I was going to say. We had a wonderful international premiere at Berlin, which was amazing, absolutely amazing, and amazing audiences. So these are all great, these sessions, these virtual sessions, but there's nothing like being with an audience and really feeling their energy, and every audience is actually completely different as well, and really interesting questions afterwards and feedback. And
talking about questions, I've got a question already coming in from the audience on the chat, and it's to you both in terms of from Mark, and he says, were you trying to force yourself to make it feel punk, or was it a natural growth, the film?
Wow. Well, I think we always knew that it was going to feel punk anyway, so I think we just went in making it feel punk, I guess. But I actually edited it as well, and I'm not sure if you can actually force it. I think it's just to kind of, I was immersed in that world for 3 years, so it after a while it kind of, the music, because I mean there's select tracks in the film, but we were immersed in like punk music when we were deciding what we wanted to, what music we wanted to have in the film, and thinking about which artists that aren't that well known, like 999 and Alien Culture, we'd like to include and bring into the story, because actually the story of Ra itself actually brings in, or Rocket's Racism itself actually brings in certain artists. So I think it felt quite natural, and like we make music docs, like, so like I think I used to work in music, so I feel like I've got that kind of sensibility.
It was 5 years, by the way.
Was it 5 years? Yeah.
Only 5.
That's short for a documentary like this, an independent feature doc. That's actually a respectable time, but we've got friends that have taken 10, 15 years.
And next, so screenings, get it out there. And do you want to revisit this subject, Or do you want to make a contemporary version of what's going on today as using music as well? I can see that happening.
I thought about making a film about alien culture because I thought that could be a natural sequel, actually, because their career took off after the carnival. So it's a bit, there's a bit of a part 2 story in there. But also, I'm, passionate about so many different issues and trying to bring them, making films, because it really takes so long to make a film, even, a TV doc. The amount of work that goes into it, that you have to really think about what do you want to, what kind of material do you want to spend your time with for the next, 2-3 years, because it's a long journey.
Hey, so Salma, do you want to come in, because the audience might want to come in and ask questions?
Yeah, of course. If anyone wants to ask a question of the panel, please use the raise hand function and I'll unmute you, or you can send it via chat to me. We do have a question here from Tracy. So she asks, what would you say is your advice for the next generation of anti-racist campaigners? And what is the most important piece of advice that you can give young people starting their journey?
Whoa, who wants to take that? Come on. I mean, for me, it's like never get burnt out. People can get very active very quickly for very short periods of time. And when you're demoralized, I think you can just like forget it all and give up. And I think over the last 30 to 40 years, there's been so many campaigns, and it takes you in different directions, but you've always got to maintain a sort of like realization. You might not have victories all the time. You have to deal with the defeats. You have to deal with them personally, and you have to deal with them politically in terms of what's happened. And so it's been particularly hard times since the start of the 80s. It feels to me like it's been conservatism all the way through. It hasn't changed in any way, shape or form. And people can get alienated. And some of the most radical, now find, funny enough, radical I can remember in the day, end up in the House of Lords. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you stand your ground. Because if you don't, everyone will forget you. You've got to just keep it going. Sometimes you have victories, and I've been very lucky, say in Asian Dog Foundation, coming out of an activist sort of work and whatever. And there's those small things. When you have small victories, you just treasure them. One time in the mid-90s in France, we're at a gig, and it's like a pub. We're playing, and it kicks off. The audience is going mental. There's about 300 people. And we just took it for granted that this is a party town. They love it. And then afterwards, we're talking to the people owning the place and some of the youth, and they said, well, no, reason we calmed down, and it was largely North African, Arabic, Algerian second generation, was because this is an NF pub. It's an NF bar. But you lot have come. Nobody knows who the hell you are, but we know who you are. And we've just taken over this bar for this evening in this town. And I always thought that's one of the biggest victories we could ever have. It was pure front, national front. And another time we play in some place in Toulon, and the security NF, the town's NF, the mayor's NF, Front National, and he's taking anti-racist books out of the library. And you take that, and if you can use culture and music, it gives you a certain valuable lesson in that you can reach people in different ways. And even though perhaps even language or anything else, people just like remember that, and it becomes part of their wider thing, just like it was for myself talking about Misty back in the day. Go on, Ira, sorry, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just for like kind of younger activists and new people just kind of starting out, if you want to just know how to get involved, is sometimes just a quick Google search about like what's going on in your area, who's doing what campaigns are going on, see how you can get involved, see how you can volunteer. And then if there is nothing in your area and there's no one that you can join on, just see what maybe you can just do yourself. So we had a guy called Dan who approached us recently, and he works this thing called, he started this thing called Heavy Sonics, where he's a DJ. He decided to just get a bunch of his friends, and then he was like trying to find, he would do like a night where it was like all female DJs, and then he'd do another night where it was like all BAME DJs, and then just did some like fundraising, like GoFundMe, and then used the money to donate to BLM. So it's just like, there's lots, like, just see what skills do you have, what skills do you have, and if you have no skills, who do you know, and can you see anyone else who's maybe interested, and just brainstorm with them and be like, okay, so what do we care about, and how can we see if we can make a difference, just as, some type of advice for some people.
For me, this is the punk. This is the punk culture. Do it yourself, DIY.
I'm done speaking, by the way. So if anyone wants to,
this is DIY. Do it yourself.
It's grassroots movements. It's the most important.
Absolutely.
Power to the people.
So, do we want to have some people we could actually see him when he?
Yeah, definitely. So whilst John is taking a brief Zoom pause, why don't I unmute? I can see Judith's got her hand up, so I'm just going to unmute you, Judith, so you can ask your question to the panel. Feel free to turn your video on if you would like.
Hi everyone, thanks for hosting this Q&A, John. I've got one question for you and then a generic question for the rest of the panel. So John, Rich Mix, is all about bringing art and culture together to create conversations. You're a founding member, so I had a question to you, which is, what role do you see Rich Mix having in these particular political times in terms of keeping that conversation going? And then to the rest of the panel, I couldn't help but watch this film and have such conflicting emotions, both of excitement around watching the passion with which Rock Against Racism set up a movement and addressed so many issues, and total depression in terms of, have we not moved on at all? And so my question to the rest of the panel is, are you ultimately at the moment optimistic or not?
So I'm sorry, I missed, unfortunately it froze for me, so I missed that question you're saying about asking about Rich Mix.
So Rich, John, I just, particularly when you were talking about the gig that you did at Rich Mix with Love Music, Hate Racism, Rich Mix was set up to have that conversation around art and politics and bring communities together and to create conversations. And so my question, and that was, set up in 2006. So my question is, today, what role do you see Rich Mix having in continuing that conversation, particularly within the environment that we're currently experiencing, not only with Black Lives Matter, but also as a result of Brexit and everything that's followed from there?
Well, for me personally, get involved in things. We had a community music CM, which is now operating in near Whitechapel. I was involved with that. Is how we set up Asian Dub Foundation. I think our first gig was a gig for Kudasali, who was stabbed by racists in '93. We had our first gig as a benefit. That's where the name came from, because we needed a name to put on the flyers. And Rich Mix, I'm very interested in, working in organisations, but I think what's more is like creating spaces in a way where people can come together.
Yeah.
And very much it's about space. And what we've seen collectively, and we feel it now more than anything, is that we're not actually physically meeting or whatever. The difficult is when we're being atomized anyway, so it makes anything that we do much harder. In some senses, it's easier. It was easier then, because everyone, you talk to people, I'm going to Victoria, I'm going to do, this was the big thing on your agenda. Now there's so much floating about. But if you can get people in the same space and have those things and put on culture and art that's relevant, or they're informed by your audience, then that's what I want to do. And you get these spaces where it's safe spaces you can do.
Yeah.
And so a bit like I was talking about these places like taking back spaces, like in France when ADF were playing, we're just a catalyst to do that. But we need to have collective spaces. Public spaces are going. The voluntary sector has been decimated. What's happening at even places we might not own and control, like South Bank. We've all gone to South Bank, and now there's only going to be like 10% of the space used for a cultural thing. We've got to get that back. I was lucky enough to go to be involved with youth clubs, community centres throughout the 80s. This is when it was a downturn, we were able to immerse ourselves in the work that was going on there and the people and the things around us. That kept us going. Now, public space and space that we can actually self-organise has been taken away. And so very much things like Rich Mix, where I was involved with back 2000 and up until quite recently, they are like gold dust, and we've got to share them and we've got to support them. But we've also got to put their input into them. You know, they don't exist as something else unless the audience takes a role in leading it, in working within it, throughout its thing, and directing it. So it becomes, otherwise sometimes these places can shift and just be up there and then nothing to do with the local. It's very easy now. The funders and whatever else would love community centres and everything to be just tourist traps, where you go, you know, where the latest whatever's gone for the tourists or whatever, or people with money. We've got to keep gigs cheap, we've got to do all that. Sorry, that was it. And the second question, I'm talking too much, guys, because this is so informal. I talk, and that's my problem. Whereas I'll be intimidated up on stage and I'll point at, you deal with it.
So yeah, Rose, Becca, Rubika, Ed, Ira, ultimately optimistic or not?
I think I'm neither optimistic nor pessimistic, but ready for a street fight, basically. A really long, hard, serious amount of work that is coming up, that is here to a large extent and is coming our way. And I think it's so true what's being said about cultural space and public space being taken away, and public life in general becoming more and more constricted. And I think that, you know, it's interesting that at the end of the film it says in 1979 the National Front were defeated at the election, but of course in 1979 we see Margaret Thatcher come to power for an incredibly long time, and in that power to destroy so many working class institutions, so many spaces in which people were able to build power and to have self-organisation, and also to start a lot of the kind of policies that you see with regards to citizenship and asylum applications in this country, and you know, rights of residency in this country, that are now have been built upon layer on layer on layer, which lead us to, you know, Katie Hopkins columns now becoming essentially government policy. So I think, you know, there's another history there in terms of perhaps the NF were defeated at the ballot box, but something else happened, and we live with the echoes of that still. So I don't know. Neither optimistic nor pessimistic, but just ready for a huge amount of really difficult work, basically.
Like Becca, or similar. I probably lean more towards saying optimistic, but it's not exactly like I have a skip in my step or anything about it. It's just knowing and not being intimidated by the sheer amount of work that needs to continue to happen. And I would probably say I feel more on the optimistic side because I've just surrounded myself with, you know, on social media with all the other people doing activism, all the groups that are doing such great work. So I have that around me all the time to remind me that, you know, there is great work being done, and people are, you know, they are angry, they're making changes, they're committing to educating themselves, they're committing to making differences in their spaces, they're committing to doing things themselves, and that's really heartening to see, and it's energizing to see that, which is really important, because doing the work is, you know, it takes its toll. Like John, you were saying, you know, don't get burnt out, you've got to take care of yourself, but at the same time I think I'm just so heartened and so glad that there's so much amazing work being done.
I think I read something in the Guardian this week about a young woman who had organised one of the Black Lives Matters protests in her local town. I don't remember where it was, but she was only 16 or 17, but she said she was energised by the environmental movement that had happened, you know, around Extinction Rebellion. And she'd said, I'd seen how it could be so effective with small groups and with young people. And that's the bit that I feel, you know, sort of is the optimism that we can take from watching a film that, you know, is so fundamentally about defeating racism. And I feel as if we're living in an even more racist society than I feel that I've ever experienced, particularly with some of the judgment strategy, whatever, that's coming out at the moment in terms of the government policies. Rubika, I'd love to hear from you, just from that reflection, as you say, of 3 years putting this film together and then it coming out in the last year.
Absolutely. I mean, when we set out to make the film, you know, we didn't know that this, you know, hard swing to the right was going to happen. I mean, you kind of felt it. There was, you know, like it was in the air. Things were happening, and you know, I think as a person of color as well, you know, you see things that are happening around you. Like, you know, I'm actually from the West Midlands, so you know, I'm not always, you know, I travel around the UK a lot. And so, you know, you kind of can gauge the feeling. So, you know, there was a motivation to make the film because of, you know, my experiences here anyway. But then for everything to happen during its production, you know, made it even more vital, you know. And so in terms of pessimist or optimist, I mean, I kind of swing both ways. Like, one, you know, it really depends on what's happening. Things are changing so quickly. You know, things are moving so fast in terms of, you know, race relations and just gender and political ideas, and you know, and then Extinction Rebellion comes along and it gives you hope. It gives you a feeling of, you know, a new generation are out there, you know, campaigning for something they believe in. Black Lives Matter, obviously, a recent example. But you know, something that I think about actually, like when I think back to all the rushes that I watched at the time, the late 70s, it was a really violent time. It was openly violent, and the language that people used then was, you know, it was vile, it was awful, it was, you know, just horrible language referring to people. And you know, that doesn't happen now, and I think we're able to articulate our ideas around anti-racist activism much more clearly now. We're able to say what the issues are, rather than, you know, I think the ideas are talked about on mainstream media now, you know, things like white privilege, you know, other terms that are, you know, in the zeitgeist and in everyday language now. Whereas in the late 70s, it wasn't. It was just a platform for, you know, white, I guess, racists like, you know, Tyndall and Martin Webster. Although I did see something on, I saw Nigel Farage interviewed in the Murdoch documentaries, and I just thought, oh, not again. You know, putting him in this, you know, really quite, putting him on the pedestal, really, in the way that they presented him. But anyway, I digress. So yeah, sorry to not have a kind of optimist or pessimist. It really depends on the week. What can I say? Things are moving in all directions.
Ira, I don't know whether I don't want to hog Selma. I don't know whether there are other questions coming up, so I don't want to.
We have another hand up.
But Ira, did you just have, I know it's a very black and white question, and that's, you know, polarizing, but.
Have we got another question, Selma? I see something written down. It's quite interesting. Raz asked, what do the panel think the role should be of music and popular culture to address the way Black and disabled communities have borne the brunt of COVID-19?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Sorry, what do the panel think the role could or should be of music and popular culture to address the way Black and disabled communities have borne the brunt of COVID-19? Because I mean, it is, you know, this is where these issues come in a way. The COVID crisis has been a catalyst as well to to highlight issues around race, disability, health, you know, from sweatshop workers in Leicester, which is hidden under the carpet like it's a 19th century and no one wants to talk about it, but it's there and we've known it's been there, but there isn't enough infrastructure to even monitor such things. Across to issues around health, frontline workers in the NHS tend to be from BAME communities. To many aspects, it's a myriad thing, and somehow this is raised somewhat in the news, but it's not culturally. We're not addressing these issues very much, and we need to. How do we do this? How do we get campaigns? It's not. So some of these things. What I mean is, some of these things, like fascism marching, we do something about it because it's an event. It's there. We do. But some of these long-term things, how do we get in there? What do we need to do to sort of like talk about these issues about class and race and the effects that are going on in society today? And COVID has just blown it open. Look at this, look what's happening. Who's dying from COVID? Sorry, Rose, did you want?
Yeah, I mean, just something that came to me when you were talking was such an effective thing that I think musicians can do with their reach, and also just what music does so great is normalize talking about issues, and it can bring phrases and ideas to people in ways that and has a reach that, say, you know, newspapers don't necessarily have, or they have in a different way, and I think that's really important, and that's definitely, you know, speaking out about things, you know, things like mental health, things like depression, and also like sharing political ideas. There's loads of musicians who do that openly and really well, and I think normalizing these discussions is a great thing to do, and kind of bringing those ideas to people is a first step to igniting the activism of people who may not have, you know, yet been energized by it.
I think
We got some more questions. Oh, sorry. Go on.
no, sorry. I wasn't going to say much. I was just thinking about like when it comes down to like let's say the COVID issue affecting the BAME community more heavily than well, other communities. I'm not sure if I'm going to formulate this properly. With situations like that, it's what the music industry can do. Yes, you can use the role models and their platforms to like speak about, oh, why, like what are the reasons that can be understood for why this is happening. And one of the main ones would be like because people of color are on the front lines in all walks of society. They're the people that they're the bus drivers, the nurses, the street cleaners. They're literally just out, and they're the most exposed. That's the reason why they get it the most. It's just simply statistical. If they're the ones that are actually like taking it, and then I guess it's like, how could the music industry actually affect that? Well, they're not going to necessarily change the kind of jobs that ethnic minorities can get, but trying to bring to light the kind of lifestyles that are actually lived by people in these kind of situations, I think could be quite helpful, because there is a very problematic narrative of what I like to call like kind of Schrodinger's immigrant, which is the person who's simultaneously lazy and scrounging benefits and also stealing your job. So it's just like, it's about like bringing to light what their lives are actually like and what they're actually having to go through and why they end up having to deal with such consequences, is something that as a musician you can either do through a song, well, not just a musician, but people in the industry. It's something you can actually do through a song, but also about like kind of having discussions like this about like kind of enlightening. But it's also the type of musician that is important, because it's very easy to fall into an echo chamber that you just end up to like, we're, for example, all talking about these kind of issues. And I'm pretty sure most of the people that are in this watching this panel are probably on the same kind of political side as each other, where it's about reaching those communities that maybe have slightly different like maybe different kind of experiences, different kind of conversations, and about changing their minds.
Yes.
And the wonderful thing about musicians and such is that people feel like they already know them because they listen to their music. They feel like some type of connection. So when they go, hey, there might be another way of looking at this, people are more inclined to be like, maybe there is another way of looking at this. Because I'm telling you, if you've ever done, like, just been on the streets and tried to talk to the actual public, that can be very demoralizing, very, very, very demoralizing. So yeah, I think it's about using role models and the such to highlight the parts of the narrative that aren't usually told.
Okay, well just because I'll plug a project that I was just involved with. I've just worked with a group of musicians in Manchester and in Jamaica. And it was funded by Opera North up in Leeds. And using this same format, Zoom, we've done a piece, or I was involved in supporting a piece done by artists around COVID and BAME, Black and ethnic minority communities. So Rich Mix has tweeted it out, and if anyone wants it, we'll retweet it out, or we'll put it on the website or something if people want to see, because I think it is first, it's about the experience being articulated, and from that then you can get a response, or you know, we can build this up so people can understand what's going on in the communities. Salma, another question. I know we're running, I don't know how long we've got actually. Are we running?
I can't stay for much longer, if I'm completely honest.
I think we've probably got time for one or two more questions, probably just one. And there's Mark in the room who has got his hand up. So Mark, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question to the panel?
Yeah, so I am curious about, one of the things that Becca had mentioned was a lot of things that are going on in the US and how they sort of explode into the rest of the world, specifically the Black Lives Matter. But do you all feel that we have a shiny object syndrome or short-term memory where we've forgotten about the Amazon rainforest? We don't care anymore. We've forgotten about Tiananmen Square. We've forgotten about Free Tibet. We've forgotten about the Me Too movement. We've forgotten that Coca-Cola and Nike are doing not so wonderful things with child labor. And the reason I ask is because I'm in the States, but I am part of a global artist connection, working in South America and Central America, as well as Iran, China, India, and other parts of the US. And what we've been discussing over and over again is that we as a community of artists, especially, we realize that we have a voice that can be heard, and some of the problems that we're facing internally within our groups is trying to communicate the issues that are going on in our regions. So the Black Lives movement is not as pertinent in Rwanda, for instance, or some other countries, and more pertinent would be the war that's happening between India and China. And so do you find that you struggle to wake up in the morning because regardless of whether or not you're optimistic, there's no end. It's just constant. It's just continuous. And I'm unfortunate enough to live in a country that has a person who's constantly berating anyone and everyone, and it gives permission to many Americans to make those same statements. And one of the things that Ira had said was that it can be incredibly demoralizing, and it's not just demoralizing, but it's frightening. When Trump put Steve Bannon into a position of power, I was physically scared for my life because I'm a Jew, and I have lots of friends that are Muslim, and I was frightened for their lives, literally being put back into prisons and into death chambers, and it's sort of happening now.
Sorry, Mark, can I come in? It's like, first, a bit, you're saying a lot, and there's a lot to sort of like big part there. But it's also about, but it's what you're saying isn't that history? History is about the struggles.
Yeah.
Wherever you are, it's always about the oppressed and the oppressor, isn't it? So that's collective history, and that's not something that won't change. And actually, in a way, things are becoming more. It might seem that things are more confusing, but actually, there's more of a clarity in what's going on now across the world than ever before. And I think, you know, it's important. What you're saying is correct. Is you've got to generalise issues. It's not just about, we're talking about 1970s and what was reaction to the fascists, the National Front in the UK. Of course, this leads into everything, and I think the film very much does talk about policing, talks about immigration, talks about the wider thing, talks about the recession, talks about IMF, lots of other things, and that's really how we must all. And I think there can't be anything but optimistic. There is no any other option, really, is there? And so you yourself as a musician, myself, or whatever practitioner in the arts we are, and activism, we don't really have any. It's not a question of whether we feel optimistic or whether we get up in the morning. Generally, there isn't any options. You just have to get on with it. I think, Becky, you said it. That's it. We just have to. In fact, all we have to do is toughen up our act and use whatever resources we've got to push it a bit further.
I mean, I do think it's true that it is history, and I suppose, I mean, it is incredibly overwhelming, and I think we have to appreciate the level of emotional toll that many things that people are living through on a day-to-day basis actually take, and actually be respectful of the level of kind of emotional erosion that can happen in this sort of circumstance. You know, the fact that we're all on Zoom in the middle of like once in 100-year event global pandemic is not normal and will affect all of us, like even at the kind of most shallow level, that will affect how we feel. But I also think, you know, yes, it's history, and people have been through worse and come out the other side with victories. And when I feel completely demoralized by everything and overwhelmed and daunted by the whole political situation, I think of those moments in history when people have, you know, fought tooth and nail to be able to win freedom, to be able to win dignity, to be able to win some peace. And I think about, you know, the kind of conditions that people have been in and have still managed to fight and still managed to win. You know, like I think about the Haitian Revolution, for example, and I think people have been through worse and they've done better. So that means that we can keep going.
To be
John, as possibly the oldest person on the call, do you think that we're forcing ourselves to pay attention only to the most recent? I mean, do you find that in the UK anyone is still screaming free Tibet or still screaming save the rainforest?
A couple months ago. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut off there.
Yeah, that's great.
I would say like it's not so much that people have forgotten, it's just that the battles are like still the same, but they've just slightly changed their face a little bit. So earlier on you said, is anyone still talking about the Amazon rainforest? So, well, you had the XR rebellion protest going on a couple months ago. No one's necessarily saying free Tibet, but they are talking about Hong Kong at the moment, which is in a very, very similar position with China, and like the kind of difficulties that China's China's a big problem. But yeah, I say I don't think that people have forgotten about these things. I think we're still just fighting for it, and it is demoralizing, it is downright depressing, and it is scary. But it's still worth doing, because I mean the idea of just giving up and just letting them win is just much more terrifying than fighting them as much as we can, at least in my opinion.
One of the last things that I wanted to say was that I have worked extensively with Bad Brains. I don't know if anyone knows the band Bad Brains,
Yeah.
but they literally will not perform anywhere where Coca-Cola is served. So, do you find that artists are able to make those statements? And I mean, Bad Brains is certainly not a massive equivalent of Justin Bieber, but do you find that artists are making those demands?
I think it's a slightly different issue, but bands and sponsorship now. Well, there isn't any gigs, so I think we have to relook at the way things are going, and there may not be gigs like they used to be, and artists may not be able to make a living out of performing live, which used to be selling records and then go back in the studio, do a tour to support the record. Now you tour or you perform to earn your bread and butter, and that's changed significantly. Anyway, and Spotify did say you've got to work harder. You artists, you're not working hard enough for your 0.3, 0.2% of whatever plays is given. And yeah, sponsorship comes in, and of course it does, and it limits the ability of artists who want to maintain a certain ethical validity to perform, because most things are interrelated, but you can't escape that. Modern capitalism is about those things, and culture it's always been a constant war that culture is wanting to be owned by the people to sell stuff, rather than it being about culture as an expression of independence, political independence. So we'll never get away from that. One more question, Selma, and then I think we wrap it up, innit? Because we're about 2 hours in, huh? Unless anyone, sorry, my lovely panel, I forget, because I'm not sitting next to you. I forget you're all sitting there. Anything else anyone else wants to say? Sorry. The filmmakers, come on.
One thing I do have a little bit to say is about just when it comes down to musicians and the artists and all that lot. It's like they have a role of inspiration, but they're not the be all end all like results of like the movement. So at the end of the day, it is the rest of us that have to make these changes, like not buying Coca-Cola, trying to make sure that we live like ethically sound lives, which is in this world increasingly difficult to just function, because everything that we use is in some way using some type of slave labor or such and such. It's just, I guess it's just picking your battles really, but it's just doing your best to try and make sure that just doing your best and trying to get as many other people to do their best too, in whatever forms that is plausible. Doesn't mean everyone has to go vegan, but it would be helpful if more people did. Doesn't mean everyone has to give up Coca-Cola, but it'd be helpful if more people did. It's about doing whatever you can.
Yes. Anyone else want to make a few comments, or are we sort of wrapping it up? Is there anyone desperate to say anything? So I'll ask a question or make a statement. Or
I think we've got quite a few questions that we haven't been able to get to, but I think what this shows is that there's a lot more to say on the themes of the film, that maybe we should schedule more conversations like this and get more amazing panel members around the Zoom. But yeah, I just wanted to say, in terms of what Mark said, is that when this, through the medium of this film, we are having a dialogue with history, and we can see it in the archival footage, and we can see it in the way that the way that we're having this conversation now. So I would say that even via this conversation will support kind of future movements, even in a small kind of way, ripple effect. So and that's the beauty of like a film like White Riot, that it's able to open up those conversations between historical movements and present ones.
yeah, so final words to the filmmakers. Would you like to say anything about it? You want to say anything about the film, or what do you think? in terms of like creating a debate, you wanted a debate to happen.
Well, when you're in the middle of making it, you don't think about that. Actually, you're just thinking about getting it finished, and actually, how am I actually going to finish this beast of this thing that called a film? It's 80 minutes on screen, but it's 5 years of your life, you know, and probably about 3 years of that is like full-time working on the film. So I always, it sounds terrible, it's such a filmmaker thing to say, but you know, everything I want to say is kind of in the film, but it's not. There's so much more that I want to say as well. So you know, a lot of what I guess for me, the motivation to make this film as well was also about, you know, the shared ideals of Rock Against Racism and the guys and women, guys and gals that, you know, started that movement, and me being able to explore some of the issues that were important to me through that film. You know, there's so much more that I would love to, you know, if it was a series, I probably would have explored Britain and its legacy, colonialism, so much more, because I feel like, you know, there's a whole wealth of history there that's not really talked about, and there's so much that I didn't know and that I learned from making this film, and about actual, you know, activists that were out there like Stuart Hall, you know, and the kind of you know, thought leaders of that time, people that were standing up and you know, putting their lives on the line, really standing up for communities, and you know, how a lot of those people have been forgotten, or they, you know, these kind of stories and these ideas get resigned to the left. And you know, I think with White Riot we wanted to pull that out and make it feel mainstream, you know, and to reach new audiences, I think is really important. You know, but for me especially, I think that's something we talked about, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah. I think the other thing, I mean, this is kind of evident from the film, but you know, one of the things that we really loved about the members of Rock Against Racism was, I mean, they're all clearly very talented creatives, but just the wonderful grassroots nature of the movement, and these were everyday people. I wouldn't say ordinary, because ordinary is a sort of a, you know, it's,
I think I said that by accident once.
yeah,
I know you mean
everyday people doing something really extraordinary, and you know, amongst themselves. And yes, the Clash came on board, and all these amazing bands came to, you know, to help them with the gig, but they actually got the thing up and running themselves without any big names or celebrities or anything. And you know, that's really, I mean, that's inspiring, isn't it? It's still inspiring today.
So guys, on that note, from the filmmakers, and you know, I want to thank you for such a wonderful film, and I can't wait to go and actually see it in the cinema and hear it on the sound system. I'm Gang of Four. I'm so happy you put that in there. Anyway, yeah. I think we're done, really. So we're all finished. I want to thank the panel. I thank everyone, and sorry it's been a bit chaotic, but that's the nature of it. It's lovely. Rich Mix has seen his virtual audience. Thank you so much for attending, everyone, and hopefully at some stage we'll be open again, and yeah, we take it from there. And love and strength to everyone. Yeah, respect. You know what I mean. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Are we done?